Hey guys, this is John, and I am back with tournament analysis number 2. This is the second round of the Minnesota Closed Championship that I've been working through with you guys. If you missed round 1, that was a game I played against International Master Andrew Tang, and I have a playlist up now for my tournament analysis series, so if you missed that game, you can go back and have a look at it very easily. So here in round 2, I have the black pieces against Sean Nagle, who's up here. Very strong player, 24-13 FIDE going into this event. Sean and I have known each other for a long time. We go way back in Minnesota chess. And to be quite frank, he is one of the most difficult opponents I have in chess. Actually, he might be the most difficult opponent I have in chess. Simply because we've played each other so many times, and I feel we know each other's style so well that he's always a tough opponent to prepare for and play. Also, he's a few years older than me. I believe he's 3 or 4 years older. And I don't know, maybe psychologically I've always felt he's a bit more mature as a player, even though for the past many years I've had like a slightly higher rating. Um, he has always, in my opinion, been a super strong player, but for a while he hadn't made his IM title, and he actually just got it in the past year, which was way overdue in my opinion. And even though I had like a slight rating on advantage on him for the past several years, whenever I played him, I never really felt that I had much of a skill advantage to rely upon. In fact, it sometimes felt the opposite way. I felt like his experience advantage and the fact that he knew my style and vice versa basically just made it an even contest every time. Our stats against each other, though, have been vastly in Sean's favor, as you might expect based on that preamble. And specifically in this tournament, our state closed championships, he's pretty much had my number. I've never beat him in this tournament, and I've just, had a tough time. So I always learn a lot from games with Sean, and this one was no exception. So it started with d4, and I played knight f6. In our past many encounters where I have had black, I've usually played d5, and he is a big expert on the exchange Slav for white. So we've had many games that have gone d4, d5, c4, c6, take and take. And usually Sean has a slight initiative, and sometimes I manage to quell the initiative. On other occasions, he has rolled me over from the white side of this opening. So this time around, I wanted to try something different. So I played knight f6 on move 1, and he played knight f3, and I played b6. Those of you who have been following my games on my channel, especially my standard games, and maybe occasionally my blitz games, you know I've been experimenting with the queenside fianchetto early on without committing the E or the D pawns. Basically playing as flexibly as possible with a queenside fianchetto and not moving any of these guys yet. Oftentimes this will be combined with a double fianchetto. So I may reserve the right to play after bishop b7, move g6 and bishop g7. Extremely hyper-modern strategy. If Sean had done that, c4, I bet the game would have taken that sort of character. Probably c4, bishop b7, let's say g3, to try to set up a fianchettoed bishop posing mine, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, castle, castle, and here we reach a tabia for the double fianchetto. And I have a game or two in my standard archive, the 15-minute games, reaching exactly this position. So going back, he instead played bishop g5, which is a Torre formation, so the Torre attack for white. And I decided to play knight e4, attacking his bishop. If I were to leave the knight on f6 and continue developing, let's say bishop b7, it does give him the option of taking and compromising my pawn structure. I'd probably take with a g-pawn, and we have a dynamic position where white has given up the bishop pair, but saddled black with some weaknesses and probably dissuaded black from castling kingside, at least for now. So I wasn't keen to allow that. I played knight e4 instead, attacking his bishop. He dropped the bishop back here to h4. I played bishop b7, and he responded with knight bd2. So I had been on my own since knight e4, a few moves back. I wasn't aware of any new games in this line, and based on my choice of opening, which Sean could not have anticipated, we were both freestyling it at this point. So I knew it was going to be a unique chess game. We're not going to be following conventional theory. And for a state closed championship where this round is absolutely crucial, because often the tournament will come down to how we do against each other in this tournament or in this game. I think this is a good way of playing. It's an open, it's a fair fight. So here, I found one game in my database when I was analyzing the present game that went knight takes d2 for black. So just immediately capturing. And then after queen takes d2, black played g6, going for the aforementioned double fianchetto. And after e3, bishop g7, the player playing white, who was 2600, played a4. Black responded with castles, bishop e2, d6, a5, h6, probably played to maybe threaten g5, g4, castle, and then knight d7. And this game was eventually drawn, but I kind of like the setup that black has. It's a very flexible one with the two bishops. White has some initiative down the queen side, sort of irrelevant for our purposes, but I just wanted to show that line to illustrate how black could opt for a double fianchetto system if they want. Instead, though, I did not capture on d2 on move 5. I played c5. So trying to strike at the center from the side, and Sean responded with e3. And here I took on d2. So he actually commented after the game that he perhaps should have captured right away on e4, just so that my bishop would have been dragged out to the center. Maybe he can potentially even cut off the bishop's retreat with a move like d5, or just play e3 now, and it may be awkward for me to have the bishop out here. Bishops don't generally do well on centralized squares. They prefer to be back on squares like b7, influencing matters from a distance. So we both agreed that the immediate capture on e4 probably would have been a bit better. But instead he played e3, and now I decided to rectify my small error I made on the last move by playing knight takes d2. He took with his queen. I played d6, and he played bishop b5 check. This was an interesting move, and the first big psychological moment in this game. And I think I kind of figured out what Sean was up to with this one. So he likes to put the pressure early on, and he will definitely push any chance he has to create complications in the position, especially with white. I think he plays more aggressively with white, as most players do. So here, if I were to play bishop c6 and just offer a bishop trade, I felt like I was ceding him the initiative. And in my estimation, at the very least, white could trade bishops and then play d5. And my knight doesn't have a great square to go to, and I'm behind in development. I still need to move my dark square bishop and castle. I think at the very least, white has a comfortable advantage. It might even be a big advantage if black isn't careful over the next few moves. So undoubtedly, bishop c6 is a safe move, but it pretty much gives white a risk-free advantage. Instead, I played a more principled move in response to bishop b5 check. I played knight d7. So knight d7, blocking the check, but keeping the diagonal open for my bishop. Now, in playing knight d7, there's an interesting tactical line that white has that at first sight looks very dangerous for black, but we both determined that it was harmless and, in fact, could just backfire completely on white. And that line is d takes c5, b takes c5, keeping the d file closed for now, and now this pretty audacious move, knight e5. Now, this did not happen in the game, but just to illustrate the line that both of us were looking at when I decided to play knight d7. So after knight e5, white is double attacking d7, and I would have to take it, so d takes e5, and then he can castle, and it looks like there's just a lot of heat coming down on d7, which there is. He has 3 attackers on there. But after I played bishop c8, I was looking at this position in my head, and my instinct said black stands poorly, but then again I couldn't find a convincing follow-up for white. I didn't see how he could ratchet up the pressure on the d7 knight. So ultimately I said to myself, you know what, this position looks uncomfortable, but I feel in my bones that black can defend, and if I do defend, I'm up a piece. So I have to allow this. It's not worth playing an inferior move way back here like bishop c6. to avoid a line that I think is safe to begin with, which is knight d7. That's what I did. And Sean admitted after the game that he had wished I had played knight d7. He thought I might, that he wished I had played bishop c6 and thought I might based on that semi-bluff move, bishop b5 check. But I did play knight d7 instead. And then he played an interesting move in reply, which I think was overreaching a little bit. He played e4, advancing in the center, trying to open lines. So obviously I could take this pawn on e4, but I was uncomfortable with the prospect of the e-file being open when it takes me several tempos to castle. So I wasn't thrilled about taking this. I mean, at the very least he could castle and then quickly post a rook on e1. And even if I were to trade on f3 and double isolate his f-pawns, I think he just has so much compensation here, it's not even worth exploring for black. I would hate to play this position. It just seems awful to me. Probably it's losing even. So going back, I didn't seriously consider taking on e4. I instead played a6, just attacking his bishop, forcing it backwards. He played bishop c4. I played b5, attacking the bishop again. And now he played bishop d5. I traded on d5. He took with his e-pawn. And now I played a move that, after the game, Sean said he had overlooked, which was c4. c4. This is a nice way of keeping the position closed for black. Because if I were to take on d4 instead, he gets to play knight takes d4. And you can see that this c6 square makes for an excellent landing spot for the knight. And if he gets knight c6 in, he'll be attacking my queen, assuming it's still there, and also attacking e7. Not good for black. Everything will be happening in white's favor after this. He can castle, he can, again, put a rook on e1 very quickly. My days are numbered in this position. So it's essential that I keep lines closed now, because I am behind in development. And if possible, I want to restrict his minor piece play, especially with this knight. Can't do much about this bishop on h4. It pins down my e-pawn, but the knight I can do some stuff about. So that's why I played c4, just pushing past. And I was happy with my position now, because my ulterior motive with c4, other than just closing down the position, was to surround the d5 pawn. And I saw a simple plan with knight b6, attacking d5, and potentially with a follow-up of queen d7 to b7, or even to f5, if white defends e4 more than one time, maybe. Let's say he were able to get his queen somehow in a position to defend it. Like in the game, he played, at this point, castles, but say he were to play queen e2, knight b6, queen e4, I could play queen d7 with an eye towards playing queen b7 and attacking it again. And I think this pawn in the long run is indefensible for him. So going back, he castled at this point, and I played knight b6. If I could win that d5 pawn, I felt like I could also secure my knight on that square and provide more protection for the e7 pawn. Maybe I'd even have an opportunity to play g6 and bishop g7 and castle short. That would be the dream scenario. So knight b6, he played queen f4. I do have to be careful because if I take on d5 directly in this position, looks good, it wins a tempo on his queen. But he could respond with queen e4, attacking the knight. And if this knight moves, let's say back to b6 for instance, this move could be annoying. This check, because notice I cannot block with my queen because he takes the knight. So I would have to block the check with the knight, and we have another scenario where I've won a pawn, but it just comes at a huge price. Lots of suffering. Immediate attack on e7. I still can't move this pawn because of the bishop x-raying the queen. Also, queen takes d6 is a threat because of the pin on the pawn. It's not worth a pawn for black to just allow all of this play. So going back here, after queen f4, I played a prophylactic move. I played h6. And the idea of this move was twofold. Mainly it was played to stop knight g5, because with his queen sitting on f4, he may consider that move to double attack f7. But also it was played to threaten g5 myself. with a fork on the queen and the bishop. So I think it's a very useful move. It's a good one, h6. Now, he played rook fe1. I still don't want to take this pawn, because if I do, queen e4 is awkward once again, or maybe queen f5 even. But essentially, I only want to take the pawn on d5 if I'm able to stabilize the knight on that square. I want to take it with my knight and not have to move the knight away. So, hence my next move, which was queen d7. I played this with an eye towards threatening to do this, and then if queen e4, going queen d7, or even queen c6. Or sorry, queen b7 or queen c6. So here, I was analyzing it later. Sean played the move rook e2, preparing to double up the rooks, but the engine likes the move bishop g3 instead, which carries with it the threat of queen takes d6. And when we were analyzing this briefly after the game, I don't think we discussed this possibility, but if I play knight takes d5, he can take on d6, and the resulting endgame should be about equal, I think. I'd probably play something like e6, we can swap, and yeah, my knight is good on d5, but his knight will also be annoying jumping in here. I think the position's roughly balanced. So that might have been a good try for him. Instead, he played rook e2. And this is interesting because I could play g5 in this position, just as I could on the previous move. But on the previous move, I saw at the very least white could play queen f6 in response to g5, hitting the rook on h8. So he would avoid losing a piece by doing that. And here, after queen d7, rook e2, if I were to play g5, I was positive he would not hesitate to sacrifice on this square. Now queen f6 is less good because of rook g8, followed by bishop g7. And the queen being here, providing a quick getaway, if necessary, is a very nice factor for black. So back here, however, I didn't want to play g5 because I thought after bishop takes g5, h takes g5, knight takes g5, threatening queen takes f7, he would get a lot of play. So for instance, f6 could just be met by queen takes f6 again, hitting the rook and potentially threatening queen f7. And I did see a line where after knight takes g5, I could castle, but he can take on f7, forking my two rooks. Let's say bishop g7, and then he can take one of the rooks, and he has a rook and a couple pawns against two minor pieces. Let's say he takes this one. And while I think black is potentially okay here, it's a very messy position, and given the pawn up position I got in the game, I'm glad I didn't go for this line. I also think a line like this would be exactly what Sean is looking for. So that's why I did not play g5. I instead just proceeded as planned. I took the pawn on d5. He responded with queen e4, and I played queen b7, defending the knight. So as I set out to do, I only want to take on d5 when I'm able to easily defend the knight with the queen. I don't want to have to move this knight from this awesome square. And in fact, this square became useful for me in the future in this game. And note once again that e6 would fail because of queen takes d5, using the pin. White wins a piece. So queen b7. Queen c6 is also pretty good, by the way. I liked queen b7, though, because it kept a further eye on e7. That's why I chose that square. He played c3, which has its merit. It does stop me from playing pawn c3 ever. I don't know that I was really thinking about much on the queen side yet. I was more just thinking in terms of consolidating my pawn advantage and completing my development. So part of me wonders whether c3 was really necessary. The computer thinks it's okay, though, for white. So c3, I played e6. Now that this move is possible, finally, I'm not pinned with the queen on d8, so that's nice. He played rook ae1. And here I played g5. And at first sight, this looks controversial. And in playing this move, I knew that my king safety in the long run would be in question, because now there's no safe wing for my king. After bishop g3, I don't think I'm chomping at the bit to castle kingside ever, just due to these pawn these weakening moves that I've made with my pawns. And at the same time, castling queenside will always be fraught with risk because I have opened it up a bit over there. I voluntarily advanced my pawn shelter. And I actually came to a determination that probably the center would be the best spot for my king with a move like king d7 that I just showed right there. I did not play that right away. I played bishop e7 in this position. And he responded with queen c2. And I played g4. So queen c2, I think he figured that he didn't really have much to do with his queen here. And it's hard to like lead an attack with your strongest piece. You usually want to lead with your weaker pieces. So he's not going to be doing too much damage with the queen. Like obviously queen takes d5 will never be played. Queen takes e6 is out of the question. There's nowhere to really infiltrate on this diagonal. So I think this is a sensible move, just getting out of the way. He frees up the e4 square as well. So one idea I thought he might try to implement is knight d2 to e4, attacking d6. So trying to improve that piece. I played g4, and even though he could play knight d2 right now, I had a specific idea in mind. I figured if he plays this, I could play h5 and start cramping this bishop. This is what I set out to do with g5. I figured that my h and g pawns would be useful in one day taking that bishop out of commission. So I do have to watch out for potential sacrifices on e6. Like if he ever plays rook takes e6, I'll have to take care. But for the moment, something like this, and then let's say queen g6 check, could just be met by king d8, queen takes, and I think black should survive. It's a little scary, but I am up a rook, and there's no huge threats quite yet. There's stuff like bishop takes d6 that could be annoying, but I think it should be okay. Like let's say queen c6 now. So going back, he instead after g4 played knight h4, and I was worried about this knight jumping to f5. So this will explain my next move, which was bishop takes h4. After the game, Sean questioned whether this move was necessary, and I agree with him in retrospect. I don't think I should have been in a hurry to take this, but I really had a lot of images of him playing knight f5 as a sacrifice in order to open the e-file and just have both rooks barreling down there towards my bishop on e7, and I wanted to rule that out entirely. So instead, though, I think a move that deserves consideration is actually just castling queenside right now. And I said earlier that it would be risky to do this, but given that he's especially put the knight over here, it's a long ways from my king, and the bishop will always be blocked by the pawn on d2, or on d6 rather. So I think it's acceptable to castle right now. And the engine thinks that black has a nice advantage, being up the pawn. But instead I took on h4. He took the bishop. Now one interesting line here is I could try knight f4 now that his bishop no longer guards that square. This move looks nearly winning at first because I'm threatening queen takes g2 mate with the knight combining with the queen there, and I'm also threatening knight takes e2 check. However, I saw that after rook e4, he's blocking the mate threat and he's attacking my knight. And if I continue optimistically with knight takes g2, intending king takes g2 f5, using the pin on his rook, that could backfire completely because after knight takes g2, he doesn't have to take my knight. He could play rook takes e6 check. And here's an example where this sacrifice is completely decisive for white. If I take, he goes queen g6 check, and my king is going to be just flapping in the wind here. I was not thrilled about the prospect of this when I have no minor pieces in the center to cover my king. So, for instance, king d7, queen takes e6 check, and if I were to play a move like king c6 here, I guess I was thinking king takes g2, but that might allow my rook to come over. Must be something stronger back here. This is one line I looked at the time, but I don't have in my analysis right now. Let's look again. King to d7. Even something like rook takes e6 is possible. maybe this is the move. It's slower, but it threatens rook e7 check, and also rook takes d6. My knight is kind of far flung here. I guess I'd have to double check and see if lines like knight takes h4 are okay for black, because it is a lot of material that black is getting. I'll double check this variation and put it in the comments, but I'm fairly certain that this would be losing for me. I just don't quite recall the reason right now. But going back, that line didn't appeal to me. I could play knight d3, by the way, if I want to do that instead of taking on g2. But ultimately, I decided the best course of action was back here, just to play king d7 instead of worrying about knight f4 stuff. I really like king d7 because it guards e6 securely. I no longer have to worry about a rook takes e6 sacrifice crashing through. So he went rook e4, guarding the f4 square and attacking my pawn on g4. I played h5. He played queen e2. And I played rook e8, so further protecting the pawn on e6. Over protection. So roundabout here, we're on move 26 now. White's next move will be his 26th move. Time control is on move 40. And just to remind you of the time control in this tournament, it was 40 moves in 90 minutes, plus an additional 30 minutes thereafter, and a 30-second increment throughout. So with that time control, it's a pretty nice time control, I think, but inevitably there will be some time pressure leading up to move 40 in most games. So here, I was feeling pretty good because I felt the position had stabilized somewhat. I had this awesome knight on d5. I felt I had solved my king problem, and I remained up a pawn. So I really thought the onus would be on Sean over the next moves leading up to time control to prove that he has compensation, or if he kind of just sits back, I could even take over the initiative myself and gradually start trying to win this position with the extra pawn. I thought I was better here. I didn't really see the compensation that he had. So after rook e8, he played f3, striving to open lines, and he kind of has to do something like this. He has to look for pawn breaks, because my position is too solid to be taken just by direct piece play. So he undermines me with f3. I decided to take with my pawn. He took with the queen. And now that there's only two attackers on e6, I felt it was safe to play f5. And he played rook 4 to e2. Unfortunately for him, rook takes e6, rook takes e6, queen takes f5 does not work. Even though there's pressure on this square, I can think of a couple reasons why this fails. I think knight c7 would be acceptable as one method to defend. And if I'm able, I can get queen d5 in. Yeah, I think this should be okay. If queen f7, king c6, and let's say rook takes e6, knight takes, and I think I'm escaping, because if d5 check, trying to separate my king from my queen, I have king b6, and admittedly though he can take here and maybe make it complicated, but bishop f2 is parried by knight c5. Pretty sure there's something even easier back here. This is a complicated game to analyze, by the way. I'm trying to show it in the smoothest way possible, but there's so many variations and sub-variations, it gets confusing. But basically, after queen takes f5, I think I would also have just this move too. Yeah, this was the move I was planning on playing. Because if queen f7, here I can just play king c6, and I'm attacking his queen. So he doesn't have time to play like rook takes e6, for instance. Yeah, so that's much better than knight c7. There's no real follow-up for white. Just be down material. So I felt comfortable playing f5 because I knew that rook takes e6 wasn't working. So he played rook 4 to e2, just retreating. And now I played rook g8. So this piece hadn't moved yet, my h8 rook. So I wanted to assign it the g file. And if he were to grab the pawn on h5, which is now undefended, I thought that did not bode well for his king safety at all. Knight f4 is one possibility now, if I want to try to fork his queen and his rook. He does have a check on h7, but even just running away with my king, like king c8 will force a queen trade. And I think here, black's position is really nice, even though it's equal material now. For instance, like rook f2 would fail for a couple reasons. Knight h3 check or knight d3, forking the two rooks. So at the very least, I'll have a nice knight versus bishop position. Pressure on the g2 pawn, knight able to come into d3, king that could march up to d5 in a lot of cases. This would be nice. I'm willing to give back the pawn to get something like this. So going back here, so rook 4 e2, and I did play that rook hg8 move, and he did not take on h5. He played bishop g3. And here I played a good move. I was thinking of ways I could increase the pressure down this g file. And one move I thought of was like rook g5 or rook g6. Sorry, my board is freaking out right now. So rook g6, let's say. But if rook g6, intending to defend this pawn and free up the other rook to double, he could actually just take on h5. And I don't have a promising follow-up because his bishop being on g3 stops the knight f4 idea. So instead, I played in this position rook g4, which I thought was a clever way to provoke him to play h3, which he did. And then after h3, now I went back to g6. And the difference is he can't play queen takes h5 because his bishop would now be undefended on g3. There's no pawn on h2 protecting it. So that's a nice point behind rook g4. So the game continued. He played bishop h2, anticipating that I'm going to double up, which I did. This rook is well placed on g6, combines both attack on the g2 pawn with defense of e6. Here he played king h1, just getting out of the pressure on the g file. I played h4, just making sure he can never play queen takes h5. And here he played rook f1. So right now we're on move 33, and creeping closer to the time control. But I would say my problems in this game began round about here. Because I knew my position was good. I felt it in my bones that this is a position that with best play, black probably should win. But I had massive difficulties in doing so. So summarizing the position, I'm up a pawn. I have good pressure on the g file. I have a stable knight on d5. Things that kind of work against me, though, are my king safety. Again, this king, for the rest of the game, will just never be completely safe because I've advanced all my pawns. I also have trouble sending this knight to an even better square. Even though d5 is nice and solid, I think the square I'd really like to get it to would be e4. But you'll see I have tremendous difficulties ever maneuvering it there. So in this position, I played queen c6. One nice thing about this position is with time control approaching, and we were getting somewhat low on time. I definitely was. He didn't have much more time than I did. We were down to like a matter of minutes. Getting closer to time control, it's nice to be black here because I can make a series of moves that don't risk too much because he's really lacking counterplay. Most of his pieces are just tied down to defense, and I can kind of keep his play at bay if I need to. So he played rook f2, just adding another defender of g2. Helps to free up his queen too. I played rook g5, just biding my time, trying not to spoil anything. I also thought it might be useful to keep his queen out of h5. Played rook back to f1. I played rook 5 to g6. Played rook f2 again. Now here, arguably, I should have waited a bit more, but I was kind of getting sick of just biding my time, and I decided, okay, now's the time to start transferring this knight. So I played knight e7. Now, after I had played knight e7, I kicked myself a bit because I thought I had missed an even better move with the knight, and that is knight f6. At least so I thought. But as a little quiz here, because I haven't given you a quiz yet in this game analysis, if I play knight f6, how can white punish this move? So white to play, what should white do? You can pause your recording if you like. Okay, so this is a little tricky. Knight f6 can be punished with the move rook takes e6, which I will freely admit this is not a move I saw during the game. Sean pointed out to me after the game, because I was lamenting the fact that I had not played knight f6, but he said, well, what would you have done against rook takes e6? And I was like, oh, actually, that's a good move. Good point. But the idea of that is, of course, if king takes rook, he plays queen takes c6, and I'm just losing. So I would presumably play queen takes f3 to get rid of my queen, but then he can insert this in-between move, rook takes d6 check. And I'll be down a pawn, like king e7, g takes f3. And there's no tactical tricks here. Trust me, I looked for them. Black is pretty much just down a pawn at this point because I lost 2 pawns in the process of playing that move. A false path, which is the line that I saw in the game, or right after I had played knight e7 rather, is queen takes c6, king takes c6, and now rook takes e6. And this was the line that caused me to reject knight f6 a few moves back. But right after I had played knight e7, I realized actually I could play knight e4 or knight g4 here, which attacks the rook on e6 with my rook and also threatens knight takes f2 check. So if he were to play rook takes g6, I can insert this move and black will be winning. Like king g1, knight takes h3, g takes h3, rook takes g6. I'm up the exchange plus a pawn, easy win. So I thought that was a nice move order subtlety, which actually validates my decision not to play knight f6, but just for a different reason. So knight f6 would have failed to rook takes e6 with advantage to white. Now, I think what I really should do in this position is actually start playing on the queen side. I was so focused on trying to increase the pressure on the king side and getting the knight to this awesome e4 square where it could attack the rook on f2 and maybe even jump into g3, that I didn't seriously consider the possibility of playing something like a5 in this position. Which, having analyzed this for a bit, is probably the way to go. I think if I'm going to make progress, I should try to start organizing b4. And it's nothing groundbreaking quite yet, but I think I need to make progress on that wing. I need to expand, especially with all of his pieces assigned to defensive duty in the center and on the king side. It's a hard determination to make, though, and appears to be even one that I could regret later because it is loosening once again. But as it happened, I played knight e7, and he seized the opportunity to play queen h5, threatening queen takes h4. And here I realized I was going to lose my pawn back. And yeah, big drawback of that last move. So I'm going to lose this pawn back now. If I had played that calm a5 move, and he goes queen h5, then because I haven't moved this knight, I could play knight f6, queen takes h4, and then knight e4. And yes, I've lost a pawn, but I've accomplished the goal of getting the knight to this gorgeous e4 square. I would have loved to do that. I would have been very much willing to give up a pawn in order to get this position, because I feel that the knight will dominate here. And it forces his rook away from the second rank, too, so this pawn will be vulnerable. So, knight e7, queen h5, queen d5. I played this just to make sure that he couldn't get d5 himself in. And I figured, well, I moved the knight from d5, so I'm not going to put it back there anymore. I'm bound for e4. So queen d5, he took on h4. Here I played rook 6 g7. This is kind of just a time pressure move, move number 38. We've got a couple more moves to play before we get the extra time, the extra 30 minutes added. He played queen h5. I went rook g5. And he played queen back to h4, inviting a repetition. I actually played rook h7, so I deviated now. Because I was thinking that my route to e4, even though it's complicated, could still be possible via g8, f6. So I wanted to vacate the g8 square for use by my knight. And this was the last move of time control, so at this point we both got 30 extra minutes. So the game continued. He played bishop f4. I played rook 5 to g6. And he played bishop back to h2. And I played knight g8 as planned, so trying to get this and this in. And he played a really great defensive move right here. And if you want to try to find it, you can pause your recording. This is nothing that will win for white or anything, but it's a good move to disrupt my plan, my intended plan of knight f6. So white to move, how can white disrupt black's knight f6 plan? Okay, the answer is queen h8. Great move. Now, if I were to continue with knight f6, the point is he can swing his queen over behind enemy lines, so queen to b8. And suddenly I have trouble with my own king, and trouble in avoiding a perpetual too. So let's say I were to continue, knight e4. He can take on e4. And if I take with the f-pawn, I actually am losing after rook f8. His attack is faster than mine. So I'm sure I would have taken with the queen had this position arose. But after queen takes d6, notice that his queen is supported by the lurking bishop on h2. King e8, queen b8 check. The only way I can avoid a perpetual is to try to march my king over and like hide it on h7. But he has this nice move, bishop d6, threatening queen f8. And I looked at this for a little bit. Black's best decision here is in fact to bail out with a perpetual by playing queen e1 check, king h2, rook takes g2, rook takes g2, rook takes g2, king takes g2, and now queen e2. And after king g3, queen e3, the only way he could possibly avoid this frontal series of frontal checks and a perpetual is king h4. But after king h4, I have queen h6, and I force him right back to g3. And it will be a draw by perpetual. So that's a longish line, but it illustrates the difficulty in black immediately playing knight f6, e4 after queen h8. So this move will be the bane of my existence for the next many moves. So I played actually king e7. I think roundabout here, given the difficulties I've had in converting my advantage and how he has frustrated me at every turn, I probably should have been more amenable to like a repetition and a draw. This is the second round of the tournament. We both had won our first games. I'm black, playing the other high-rated player in the field, the second highest rated after me. So a draw would not have been a bad result. But I was kind of guilty of a concept or a psychological mistake that I discussed in one of my Blitz videos recently, which is the feeling of deserving. So I felt almost that I deserved to win this game based on the position I had earlier. Up a pawn and very solid position. What I felt to be a pretty safe position, honestly, that I could just slowly convert to a win. But anytime you slip into that mentality of feeling like you deserve to win the game because of what happened previously or the play leading up to it, that's dangerous, and you have to curtail that behavior. You have to do your best to tear yourself away from what should be to what actually is. And if I were to just properly assess this position objectively, I would say that black might have a small advantage, but the margin of error and the chances of things going wrong is increasing with every move. My margin of error is getting smaller, that is. So after queen h8, I played king e7. Again, my king didn't really have a good place to go to. I thought about even marching it over to the queen side, like king c7, trying to play knight f6 when he doesn't have queen b8 available. But also queen f8 is a good square too after knight f6. So if I had played king to c7 and then a subsequent knight f6, they might be able to play queen f8. So I played this king e7 move. Sean gave a check on h4. I played king e8. He went back to the annoying h8 square, pinning my knight. Here I played king f7. And I thought I was being very clever because if he plays queen h4 now, well, there's no queen coming infiltrating behind enemy lines, so I have a chance to play knight f6. Of course, he is not obligated to even move his queen, and he didn't. He played bishop f4, which is a good move, activating this bishop. And once again, if the knight comes out to f6, immediate counterplay by going to b8, with similar lines possible with knight e4. So instead of that, I played king e7. He gave a check on h4. Roundabout here, I think again, I should be okay with agreeing to a draw with a move like king f7, queen h8, and king e7 again. But I played king d7, still trying to keep the position unique. And he played queen h8. Now here we're on move 48. I believe I was well under 10 minutes at this point with the 30-second increment. So I probably had about, honestly, maybe 3 or 4 minutes at the most. Maybe closer to 3 or probably not 2, but I think I had around about 3 to 4 minutes. So here I played queen b7, trying to cover some of the squares, specifically b8. And again, I was intending knight f6 and trying to get into e4 at long last. Like, this felt like a plan I wanted to see through. And I felt like I was almost getting there, but just needed to put the finishing touches on it. I didn't think I was winning or anything at this point, but I thought, like, okay, finally I'll be able to get my knight into the game. But Sean played it cool. He dropped the bishop back to h2. Here I played knight f6 when I probably should not have. And he recognized that he can't go to any of these squares, or e8, so he chose the next best one, queen f8, attacking d6. And I had seen that, so I played knight e4. Now, here is an interesting moment, and this will be the last quiz question that I'll ask you guys. So, white to move, his rook on f2 is attacked. We know there's pressure on d6. What do you guys think white should play here? So if you want to pause your recording, you can try to answer that question. What should white do? Okay, so the technically correct answer is white should play rook takes e4 and sacrifice the exchange, just as we saw on the other line. Then after queen takes e4, queen takes d6 check, it'll be the same type of perpetual. King e8, queen check. And if black wants to get greedy and try to run the king over, then after bishop d6 threatening queen f8 mate, they're going to have to opt for that queen e1, king h2, rook takes g2 line again. Because note that if rook g8 is played, trying to guard the f8 square, then it's mate in 2. Queen c7, black unfortunately has to play king e8, queen e7 checkmate. So that's what white should do if they just want to secure a draw. But I think Sean played a move that was great in a practical sense and also like fully in keeping with his style as a very resourceful player, a great counterattacking player, someone who will seize their chances if the opportunity arises. So he actually played rook takes f5, which kind of shocked me because I saw that this move was possible. I just didn't really believe it was good. Dangerous mentality, right? Especially with like 2 minutes on your clock. So rook takes f5. I have to take the rook. So I did. E takes f5. He took with his queen. So he sacrificed the rook for 2 pawns, but his argument is that he's going to get the knight back. Now, unfortunately for me, I cannot play rook e6, trying to defend the knight again, because he just has the simple move d5, pinning the rook, and black's position collapses. So I have to move my king. Now, this was a really tough position to play already, because if my king was weak before, it's going to be even weaker now. I've just been robbed of even more pawn cover. So apparently the best move in this position is king d8, which I just rejected on. I'm playing on almost pure intuition right now with a minimum of calculation with a couple minutes left plus increment. And king d8 looked like to me like I was keeping my king in the danger zone. But the engine says after rook takes e4, I can play queen f7. And I think a queen trade is forced because if he doesn't, he might have some back rank issues. Queen f1, queen takes g2. So queen takes f7, rook takes f7. And the computer claims that black is slightly better in this position, mainly because of my activity with the double rooks and my ability to create threats on the second and first rank. Note that it is materially even, though. And to be quite honest, I'm not sure what could happen. And I think all 3 results are possible given our time in this position. That was objectively the best move, king d8, intending to play queen f7. I played what I consider to be a more natural move, though, king c7, but it's a little weaker. Rook takes e4 was played. Notice that Sean has no intention on taking on e4 with the queen. Not only would that lose a pawn after queen takes e4, rook takes g2, but just on principle, he's the one attacking, so he should keep more material on board to continue his attack. So rook takes e4. Now here, I played queen c6, trying to clear a square for my king to come over, and also defending d6, because I saw that if I were to take the pawn on g2, rook takes g2, he has this nifty move, bishop takes d6 check. And in the seconds that I had to calculate this position, I saw that if king takes d6, he can go rook e6 check, and I'm dead no matter how you slice it. Let's say king d7, he can play rook f6 check. This is a precise move. He has to worry about some threats against his own king, but rook f6 check is a very good one. King d8, rook f8 check, king c7, rook f7 check. And this is decisive. If I trade rooks with him, and then move my king, let's say king b6, he can just swap, and then take out the rook on g2 at the end, and he's up 2 pawns in the endgame, totally winning. There's some sub-variations along the way there, but this is the gist of it. So there is bishop takes d6 if I were to take on g2. However, it turns out I can run away in this case. I don't have to take his bishop. So I could have played king b6 had this position arose, heading for the safe haven of a5, believe it or not. So he can play queen c5 check, king a5, and now, surprisingly, there's no win for white, despite black's king looking completely ridiculous on this square. In the postmortem, I think Sean and I actually made a mistake here, and we were just quickly analyzing the game afterwards. We didn't have a whole lot of time, but I think I showed him the move bishop c7, and he agreed with me that this move won, based on the line queen takes c7, queen takes c7, rook takes c7, king takes g2, with a 2-pawn advantage and a rook endgame, also completely winning for white. However, I think we both forgot that black, or didn't notice that black can play rook takes c7 instead of queen takes c7. And here, black is the one who's winning. So we hit the queen, and if, like queen b4 check, king b6, my king is going to slip away. This rook cannot be captured because I have queen takes e4 check. And if rook e6, I think just this is sufficient. Yeah, and now the queen defends the rook, and there's no check on c5 because my rook defends that square. So that's the type of like pretty specific and unusual line that if you're in time pressure, you're just not going to find. Like, I mean, it would take a real strong calculator to find that line. I think I am capable of finding that, but it's very hit or miss. I mean, I might find it, but chances are not good. So again, that's rook takes g2 here, bishop takes d6 check, and then just running away with the king, and keeping open the option of hiding on a5. And actually, I think the game should end in a perpetual. Queen c5, king a5, and then queen b4, queen a3, king back to b6, queen here. It's just going to be a draw because the threats against white's king are significant now. I'm threatening rook g1, king h2, and then rook 7 to g2 mate. So that's one specific line that I passed up. I played queen c6, just trying to defend d6, kind of a natural move, but this wasn't good enough. It cedes the initiative. He now played d5, attacking my queen. I went queen d7. Here's another point where the engine says the best move is queen a8, and somehow it gave like dead equality after this move. But even with plenty of time on my clock, queen a8 looks like a difficult move to find, and I probably would never play that move with a minute or two left. So queen d7 was played instead. I was hoping for a queen trade to simplify the position. But nope, he played a good move. He came back, queen f2. Trying to infiltrate via a new avenue on a7. And here I saw that if I try to stop that with king b7, guarding the square, he has bishop g1, and the battery will make itself felt. He'll get into a7. So being nearly out of time, I played rook takes g2, allowing his queen to get into a7 with check. And I thought maybe I'd be able to escape with a perpetual or something now, but he played it accurately. Queen takes a6 check. I played king c7 now. Queen b7, this move fails to, I think, rook e8. Yeah, that's why that fails. And then if king c7, he has queen takes d6 checkmate. This bishop was a big problem in all these lines. The kind of sniping the pawn from h2 all the way to d6. So that line fails. So I played king c7 instead. And here he played a very unpleasant move to have to face for me. Rook e6, now triple attacking the d6 square, just kind of leaving this rook on g2. And at this point, apparently I only have one move to try to salvage the position, and it's the move rook 2 to g3, giving up the exchange in order to block this strong bishop. I still don't think the chances of me saving this position are great. I am down, 2 pawns, pretty clear. But maybe if my rook were able to get active, I could have a chance. I mean, if he were to simply trade queens, it's not out of the question that black could save this, because now I'm threatening to take his pawn, so let's say he just deals with that with a move like king h2. Well, I get to go here, and rook d2 check and rook takes d5 are threats. Maybe black can salvage something. Even here, probably not. But so that was my last chance, rook 2 to g3, but move 58 here, I played rook takes b2 instead, basically playing on the increment at this point, and I knew I was done for. He played bishop takes d6 check, king d8, queen b6 check, and I resigned because if king c8, queen b8 is mate. Game over. So, summing up this game, this is a very complex one. This was definitely my most complex game of this tournament. And I apologize for missing a couple lines here and there, a couple lines that I still need to check on. But I noticed that this game was very much psychological. And I think I was just over eager to win this game. And I really wanted to prove that I could win this game. And that caused me to lose my sense of objectivity. And I think I should have had the wherewithal to more soberly assess the position. I'd say round about here. And not focus so much on trying to get the knight to e4, and instead be open to a flank option like a5 and b4. Just trying to make some progress somewhere else instead of just laser focus on one idea only, trying to reroute the knight. And I think especially later, when I had difficulties dealing with the counterplay involving queen h8 to b8 or to f8, I think round about here I should be okay with agreeing to a draw should the opportunity arise, and it did. I mean, he was repeating the position on a couple occasions, so I could have made a draw if I wanted, barring some real decisive decision by him to try to avoid it, but I don't think he would have. So certainly now when I'm down a pawn, and it seems very unlikely that I would ever go for that queenside plan, and I'm having so many troubles with knight f6 to e4, at this point I think it would have been totally the best decision to just shake hands and be okay with a draw against my rival in the tournament with black. But instead I allowed my clock to tick down, and he had little time at this point too, but he had more than me, and moreover, the path of the game completely changed when I allowed that queen f8 move to be played. So following the game continuation, this queen f8 move, and I kind of had a sinking feeling after rook takes f5 because I knew that I was giving him a ton of play. So, and even though objectively the position is still fine for black, the clock situation and the change in character of the game was not something I was able to handle, and I went on to lose from a great position. Other than that, I'm very pleased with my opening. I think I played a strong opening in this one. I was behind in development, but I was able to neutralize his play. I like the fact that I didn't cave to playing the inferior move, bishop c6, the inferior yet safer looking move. I stuck to my guns and played knight d7. I also like the fact that I saw this c4 idea, sealing off his d5 pawn. And I think I did a good job of consolidating. So I just wish my technical play was a little bit better. I think bishop takes h4 might have been forcing matters a little more than I needed to. That knight wasn't going anywhere, so I could have refrained from that move. So all these little things just converted a position that probably should have been at the very least a draw, or maybe with chances to win, to a loss from me. And against good players, that can happen. And that's why you constantly have to work on these things, and why I'm being brutally honest in my analysis here. So, at any rate, very interesting game, and a good game for Sean, who he hung tight throughout it, and he seized his chances. I mean, to say that I just messed this game up would be a disservice to him, because he played very well and he seized his chances with moves like Queen H8. So after this game, I was 1-1 in the tournament, and fortunately, I had faced 2 of the top 3 or 4 players in the event by this time. So my next rounds were against lower-rated players, and I'll show you guys those in upcoming installments of tournament analysis. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave that in the comments. Talk to you guys later. Bye.